Hi folks. Today I thought I would chat to you about a very important Scotsman who was born on this day. So, for those of you who perhaps appreciate or may have visited America's fantastic national parks, or maybe like the majority of you perhaps, who, like all of us I hope, who are lovers of the great outdoors and want to see it better protected, then today is a very important day. For on this day, 21st of April, 182 years ago, in 1838, a boy was born in Scotland who became one of the world's first environmentalists, and who is credited in America as being the father of their national parks. The man in question is John Muir, and he was born in Dunbar in the county of East Lothian in Scotland. Now, Dunbar is a lovely little town. It's about 30 miles eastwards from Edinburgh down the coast, and it's very easy to get to, and is certainly, if you're ever in that area, a lovely town to visit. Muir was born the third of 8 children, and his earliest recollections were said to be of taking short walks with his granddad when he was 3 years old. He began his love affair with the nature and the environment at a very early age, and became fascinated with the local landscape, and used to spend a lot of time wandering the coastline and the countryside around about where he lived. East Lothian is a beautiful part of Scotland. For those of you, many of you may have visited it. If you haven't, it is such a lovely county, what we call a county. It has superb beaches, fine agricultural land, lovely green rolling hills, and so I think it's no surprise that John Muir fell in love with it. When he was 11, Muir's family emigrated to America, and they started a farm in Wisconsin called Fountain Lake Farm, which is now designated a National Historic Landmark. And then when he was 22 years old, Muir enrolled at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and there, apparently under this huge black tree, he had his first botany lesson, which apparently he remembered all his life. So Muir attended classes there for 2 years, paying his own way through those 2 years. And although he never actually graduated, he learned a lot about geology and botany. They were his favourite subjects. In 1864, he moved briefly to Ontario in Canada, and where he spent quite a lot of time there collecting and cataloguing plants. Sorry. And then in 1866, he returns to America, and he gets a job in a wagon wheel factory in Indianapolis, where apparently he proved invaluable to his employers because he was such an inventive person. However, whilst there, he suffered an accident which is felt really changed his life. The accident damaged his eyes, and for a while he thought he would be blind. He was confined to a darkened room for 6 weeks, and whilst there, he determined that if he recovered, he would be true to himself, and he would follow his dream of exploration and the study of plants. So, at the end of that, 1867, in September, he's recovered, and he decides to undertake this walk of 1,000 miles from Kentucky to Florida, which he later recounted in a book called A 1,000 Mile Walk to the Gulf. And then after a short visit to Cuba, where he studied shells and local flowers, Muir decides to make his way to California, and he settled in San Francisco. He immediately went to visit Yosemite, a place that he had read about. And seeing it for the first time, Muir said he was overwhelmed by the landscape. He scrambled down steep cliff faces to get a closer look at the waterfalls, whooping and shouting at the views, and jumping tirelessly from flower to flower. So it had this huge impact on him. He later worked in Yosemite for a season as a shepherd, and he climbed a number of the mountains there. Muir then built for himself a cabin along Yosemite Creek that he would live in, and he designed it so that the stream flowed through a corner of the room so that he could enjoy the sound of running water at all times. And he later wrote about this period of his life in a book called First Summer in the Sierra. Then in 1871, after he'd been in Yosemite for 3 years, the famous American naturalist author Ralph Waldo Emerson came to visit and met him, and the two men spent a whole day together. Emerson was very impressed with Muir and offered him a teaching job at Harvard, which Muir apparently politely declined, saying, "I never for a moment thought of giving up God's big show for a mere profship." I think it was what he said, professorship. Muir became convinced that Yosemite had been forged by glaciers, and this put him at odds with the scientific establishment and the scientific views of that time, which stated that it had all been caused by a cataclysmic earthquake. And unfortunately, the head of the California Geological Survey tried to discredit Muir by branding him a mere amateur. But as we all know now, Muir was proved right. Muir threw himself tirelessly into the preservation of Yosemite and the Sierras, and campaigning for them to be retained as what he called pristine lands. So he didn't want to see development of them, and he didn't want to see them turned into agricultural lands or anything, that they were to be retained as they were. He subsequently succeeded, and on September the 30th, 1890, the US Congress passed a bill based largely on Muir's proposals in two papers he had published. One was called The Treasures of Yosemite, and the other was Features of a Proposed National Park. However, at this time, the park was still under state control. Subsequently, in 1892, Muir was involved in the creation of what is called the Sierra Club, which is now a very prominent American conservation organisation with, I think, about 2.5 million members. And Muir was its very first president. And he continued to campaign vigorously for conservation. And in 1903, President Theodore Roosevelt accompanied him on a visit to Yosemite. And the two men set off and camped the night under the stars. And this was apparently an experience Roosevelt was never to forget. And I believe they were woken in the morning by a light dusting of snow. On this trip, Muir was able to convince the president that the best way to protect the valley was through federal control and federal management. And this really laid the foundations for what today is the wonderful US federal national park system. So that was a massive achievement. During his lifetime, John Muir published over 300 articles and 12 books, and never ever gave up campaigning to save the environment. I feel that we, the inheritors of his world, owe so much to him, and to say that he was a man so far ahead of his years is, I think, so, very patently obvious. It was said of Muir in his lifetime, "The world will look back and remember the voice of one crying in the wilderness and bless the name of John Muir." And I think that's a very fine epitaph for a wee boy from Dunbar in Scotland. I hope, as always, that you've enjoyed this little historical insight, and if you have, maybe please give me a like and share the video with your friends so they can enjoy it as well. As always, keep yourself safe at these terrible, difficult times, and until we all meet again, I just want to wish you all the very best from Scotland.